Take a minute for my eyes to focus with the lights off for a minute. I want to thank you all on behalf of Kipling Colbert today for sitting here with us for almost 2 weeks. Appreciate all of your service. I want to talk to you It's not going to be real fancy. This is just going to be just going to write Kipling's name up here. That's what I'm going to focus on, Kipling Colbert. First, I want to start off with Larry North. I'm sure you all will remember Mr. North, who came in here in the courtroom with sunglasses on. This was the state's witness. He wasn't very credible. He couldn't even keep his story straight. He couldn't even agree with what he said from 1 minute to the next. When I asked Mr. North, was Kip there? What did he say? I don't know. I don't know. When he was asked to return, he said, I don't know. I don't recall. When he was asked who had guns, he didn't remember that either. He wore sunglasses. He couldn't look at you all in the face, and he couldn't look at Kipling Colbert in the face. That was one of the witnesses against Kipling Colbert that the state chose to bring in here. I don't think you'll forget. So I would say that Mr. North is not a very good witness against Kipling Colbert. You can't believe anything Mr. North tells you. Multiple times, he's caught in lies. Now, I want to talk to you about Tom Walker. Tom Walker was the man who came in here, and he's the gang expert. And he told you that first time he ever saw this video was a month ago. This shooting happened in December 2015, and the state of Tennessee wants to tell you that the whole motive behind this shooting was gangs. But their expert comes in here and tells you first time he saw this video was 1 month ago. Except he wasn't correct about that. Except when I asked him about in court when he came in here and testified several months before that, he couldn't remember that. I got nothing. And this video was played multiple times. It's brought in here to show you and connect Kipling Colbert and these other men to a gang. Strictly because they were wannabe rappers. That's the only proof against Kipling Colbert that he was in a gang. Which meant in this video, the loyalty is everything video that you saw, and you saw Mr. Walker testify, you saw the other expert get up here and testify about that, was made in April 2015, 8 months before this shooting. 8 months before this shooting. That Mr. Colbert wanted to be a rapper. He wanted to try to make some money in the music business. Mr. Walker, just remember what he said. If I just got the video, I ain't got nothing. I don't have any. He didn't know who wrote the song. He didn't know where the lyrics came from, other than he got the lyrics from the district attorney's office. He didn't know who wrote them. So I don't think Mr. Walker was a good witness against Mr. Colbert. So I'm going to mark him out too. So now I'm going to write down Officer Wilson. Officer Wilson was in the cruiser video where Kipling Colbert was a passenger in that car, and there was a car chase. Kipling Colbert wasn't driving. This was in April 2016, 6 months after this shooting. Unrelated to this shooting, there's a police chase. Kipling Colbert's in the car. Car stops, he gets out and runs. Everybody's running. He's afraid, he runs. But 45 minutes later, he goes into the police station and he turns himself in. Now, why would anybody go back and turn themselves in other than what, oops, I shouldn't run from the cops. He went and turned himself in. That didn't have anything to do with this shooting. He was not charged with this crime. He goes and turns himself in and said, "Here I am." So that's where Officer Wilson is the witness against Kipling Colbert. That he's a passenger in a car and he gets out and he runs. He's 20 years old. He's afraid. He runs. Within an hour, though, 45 minutes, Officer Wilson said. He turns himself in. He's not charged with this shooting. I'm going to write down Investigator Leffler. He's the lead investigator on this case. And he goes to the jail and he's talking to Mr. Bassett. And he says multiple times, Brandon Perry shot him. Brandon Perry was the shooter. Brandon didn't mean to shoot him. Maybe Brandon Perry was trying to scare the kids. Bob had formed an opinion that Brandon Perry must have been the shooter. He questioned Mr. Bassett about this over and over and over. When I'll get back to that. So before I cross Investigator Leffler, I'll leave him up here for a minute. We'll come back to him, because I want to talk about two more people. I want to talk about Zaevion Dobson. Zaevion, who was there that night. And when the shooting started, he ran. He didn't see anything, but he ran. Zaevion Dobson never told you anything about a video. He never talked to the police about a rap video. The brother of Zaevion Dobson never told the police he had any information on a video. He came in here, he took the stand, he never talked about a video. Why is that important? Let's talk about another witness. Monte Patrick. He had a little bit more to say. He knew the streets where the Bloods live. He knew the streets where the Crips live. He knew a lot of stuff about gangs. He even told you he had maybe some family in the Crips or a gang. And when he talked to Investigator Leffler right after the shooting, what did he tell him? He couldn't identify anybody in the photos that he was shown. And he said he saw somebody that came up to him. Somebody that said, "What's brackin'?" He never said anything about a video that night. When I asked him, "When did you see that video?" He said about a week after the shooting. Shooting's been almost 2 years ago. He said he saw that video a week after the shooting. He never contacted the police. Never contacted the police. And how did he know about the video? He didn't tell you who it was. Somebody in his family called him and told him about a video, and he watched it. And he said, then he told Zaevion Dobson, Zaevion Dobson's brother. But neither one of them mentioned that to the police. Why? If all of a sudden, after watching a video that somebody supposedly calls you and says, "Is that Kibling Covert?" and you don't mention that to the police? The brother of Zaevion Dobson, he doesn't tell that to the police? They don't tell anybody else? That just doesn't even make sense. Until investigator Loeffler calls him after the district attorney's office says that Devontae Patrick has identified Mr. Colbert just months before the trial. Investigator Loeffler said he did a phone interview. Out that Devontae Patrick at that time had identified Kipling Colbert. And then was part of this. Just months before the trial. But Mr. Walker said, if all I got a video is I don't have anything, then Devontae Patrick doesn't give information about Mr. Colbert. Zach Dobson doesn't give any information about Mr. Colbert. Both of them were there that night. Both of them were allegedly shot at, but they don't give information to the police. Now, the state of Tennessee, they can't have it both ways. They can't tell you if you live on the east side, you're in a gang, but if you live on the west side, you're not, or vice versa. They can't tell you if you live in a certain neighborhood, you're in a gang. But neither can they tell you that because you make a rap video, you're in a gang. But the state wants to tell you, based upon what Devontae Patrick tells you, that somebody approached him. And he got up and he went over and he identified Mr. Colbert. So if you believe that story, if you believe what the state is trying to tell you, then Mr. Colbert is walking away. He doesn't have a gun. Mr. Patrick didn't tell you he had a gun. He's walking away from the shooting. He's not part of the shooting. That's what the state's telling you. Because Mr. Patrick said it was too quick, too fast for the person that talked to me to be with the other people. Because he went in and he was trying to FaceTime Dewey, and Dewey was already running. Now he tells you it's Mr. Colbert walking away from the shooting. He's not part of the shooting. He didn't have a gun. He didn't want anything to do with it. So at this point, I don't think Zach Dobson, Devontae Patrick, or investigator Laughlin are good witnesses against Kipling Colbert. We know Kipling Colbert was a wannabe rapper. It's 20 years old when this happened. And the tragedy of Mr. Zaevion Dobson is a tragedy. There's nobody that would disagree with that. But it's a tragedy for a young man to be convicted of first-degree murder that didn't do it. Who doesn't know Kipling Colbert? Well, we know Faith Gordon doesn't know Kipling Colbert, or Xavier Malone, or Louis McNair, or Kiara Rucker, or Miss Colbert and her children. And you've seen a lot, over 600 exhibits, shells, pictures, lots of pictures, lots of stuff going on. Got Brandon Perry, that was shot and killed. We don't know who killed Brandon Perry. We don't know who killed or who shot Miss Perry. We don't know who did that. But the state has the burden. Remember we talked about that during voir dire? Beyond a reasonable doubt. It's real high. Before they can convict, or you all can find Mr. Colbert guilty. And the judge is going to give you instructions about premeditation. The state's talked to you about that. We talked about that a little bit at voir dire. In order to have premeditation, you have to have time to stop and reflect about the consequences. We also talked about mere presence, just being there. Just being there, the mere presence, doesn't make you guilty. We also talked about, I believe I asked you, if you were leaders or followers, you could make the decision if everybody else, if it was everybody against you, could hold on to your own belief system and not be swayed by people trying to talk you out of it. I know you've been sitting here for a long time. I know you probably got a lot of things on your mind besides sitting in this courthouse. It's Christmas time. But you alone will be the judges. And maybe, if you think maybe Kipling Colbert did something, or probably, or I'm not sure, or I wish I knew a little bit more, or I'm weighing it out. All those are not guilty. The state has showed you a lot of evidence. A lot of different scenes. Things about Brandon Perry, Miss Perry, Larry North, Zaevion Dobson. And at one point or time, maybe, it was like, what is this picture about? It was all up there and everything's up there. And the they put up there, they're just hoping something's going to stick. If they can tell you these boys were in a gang, if they can tell you Kipling Colbert was part of this plan, that you'll find Mr. Colbert guilty. That's not enough to make a video. And why would somebody who was allegedly shot at not come forward and identify Mr. Colbert? I hope those are all questions that's going through your mind. Why? Why would Zaevion Dobson's brother not come forward? Because Mr. Patrick told you he saw this video 1 week after the shooting. It was been almost 2 years ago to the day. This is the man that Mr. Patrick saw. If you believe that this is the man. He wasn't there when that shooting was happening. Making sure I'm telling you everything. This will be my last chance to talk to you all. This will be my last chance to say anything to you. The other two attorneys are going to come talk to you, and then the state will get to finish up. And then you all will go back and deliberate. All the evidence in this case. The state's expert came in here and told you, let's just talk about that 3.7 shell that she really couldn't identify. She couldn't tell you that where that came from or if it even was a 357. Let's talk about the Snapchat that the state wants to tell you was Mr. Colbert. But they also put their expert on who said they could not identify who was in that Snapchat. Mr. North told you I was talking to Rue, are you? Mr. North told you that was Kipling Colbert. That's not the Snapchat that the state put up. Larry North, he couldn't keep his story straight. Mr. Walker said if he just had a video, he didn't have anything. Investigator Leffler, he told you he just saw that video not too long ago. And he did a phone interview once he found out that Devontae Patrick had identified Mr. Colbert to the district attorney's office. He called up Mr. Patrick. Officer Wilson, again, told you about Kipling Colbert running when there was a car of young men that were chased, but he also told you Mr. Colbert turned himself in less than an hour. And that leaves us once again with Zach Dobson, Devontae Patrick. Who told you supposedly they had knowledge about the video. Never told the police. I hope that raises some questions in your mind. I'd asked you all when you go back and deliberate that you find Kipling Colbert not guilty. Not guilty of first-degree murder. Not guilty of any lesser charge. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. All right, folks, we're going to continue our closing arguments here shortly. Let's go ahead and take a recess, stretch your legs. You can leave no motion here. Please do not discuss this case by yourself. Let's see about 10 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
I haven't said a whole lot during this trial. It's not because I'm that rare attorney that doesn't like to hear himself talk. I just wanted to ask appropriate questions and try to help you folks focus on what the actual evidence is. And that's what I asked you when we did jury selection. I asked if everyone could separate these cases, that there are 3 different defendants over there. And your job is difficult because this is a very convoluted case, and we have at least 3 different scenes, maybe 4. There's things that are introduced from different days. And what I'm asking you to do is to look at the actual evidence that's been introduced on the witness stand. All of this, you get to look at all of this. I want you to. And you have to ask yourself, how does that apply to Richard Williams, that young man sitting over there in the pink shirt? And the state proved beyond a reasonable doubt that he had anything to do with this at all. And what I submit to you is that we had 42 witnesses, unless I missed one. I think that's the number of witnesses we had, somewhere around 42. Not a single one of those witnesses, through their testimony, through any statement that we heard from anyone else, says that Richard Williams was in Lonsdale on December 17, 2015. Not a single witness. Not a single person puts him in Lonsdale, December 17, 2015. That's what this case is about. What happened in Lonsdale on Bassett Street, December 17, 2015. A whole lot of stuff about Green Hills, a whole lot of stuff about that, and a lot of bullet casings at Bassett Street. And how do they tie these people to the scene? They want to group them together. They want them to group together because that's what the criminal responsibility argument is. They want you to find Richard guilty because he's associated with certain people. But nobody puts him there. And if the state can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Richard Williams was even ever in Lonsdale on December 17th, then how can they prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he's responsible for anything that happened in Lonsdale that day? There's no proof that he ever had a gun or shot a gun on that day. Nothing. So how do they connect him to that scene? It's like reverse engineering is what it is. So we heard Mr. Bassett's statement. We know Brandon Perry was there. And again, no mention of Richard Williams being there that day. We know he was at Dallas Street when Brandon Perry's mother got shot. We know he was there that morning. We know he was in that car at some point that day. He hangs around with these guys. And they hung around that day. His hat's in the car. Okay. But nothing says he was in Lonsdale, and that's what we're here about. Nothing says he was in Lonsdale. Nothing connects him to the guns. When I say reverse engineering, what they're doing is Mr. Bassett says that he was present over there. We know that Brandon Perry was over there. How do we make how do we make Richard Williams present in Lonsdale? Well, we need to connect him to the guns. We know that these guns were shot over there. So they take the guns, and we know the guns were present, and then they try to connect Richard Williams to those guns by showing you things from other days. One of those guns was found in a park 10 days after Richard Williams ran through that park. And you heard the officer say that he didn't see him throw him in his sight the whole time. They found a bandana with some bullets in his pocket. If you were running through the park from police, you would think that that would be the first thing that you would toss. That didn't get tossed, it was still in his pocket. The officer said he didn't see him toss anything. And they did a search that night with dogs. Didn't find that .40 caliber gun in that park that night. 10 days later, a man mowing the lawn sees it before he hits it while he's on his lawnmower. So I say that that's evidence that gun wasn't there that night, and maybe it got deposited after that. We just don't know, and no one can testify to when that gun was there. There's no scientific evidence that links Richard Williams to those guns. There's no DNA, there's no fingerprints. We even heard the DNA expert get up here and say how many times he is excluded from all of the things that they tested. And when you see, you heard the question that I asked her, is when it says an unknown male, when you're looking through those DNA, and it says unknown male or unknown female, that means not Richard Williams, is what that means, because they had his standard to test. So, witness after witness, nothing about Richard Williams in Lonsdale. Nothing about Richard Williams shooting a gun that day. Nothing, other than he hangs out with these guys, he's in a rap video. You even heard Larry North get up here and testify that when they recorded that song, when they were recording, he was in the Navy. So he's just dancing in the background of the video. You don't see him rap, you don't see him do any of that kind of stuff. So guilt by association. These are his high school friends, this is middle school friends. That's it. That .40 caliber gun, I'm sorry, I misspoke earlier. The gun that they found in the park that they want to try to link to him is a 9mm gun, because they're trying to link any gun they can to Richard Williams. So they find a 9mm gun 10 days after he ran through that park, and they say that's his gun. There's no proof that that's his gun. Then they want to link that .40 caliber gun to him because they found it in someone else's car under the passenger seat that he was riding in. That's it. I would think that if he handled that gun Because it's not his car. He's riding with 4 other people in that car, by the way. And what do we not know? We don't know whose car that is. We don't know who drives that car. We don't know who rides in that car. We don't know anything about the 4 other people that were in that car. Who are their boyfriends? Who are their cousins? Who are their brothers? Who are their uncles? Their fathers and mothers? About anybody that was in that car. All we know is that Richard Williams was a passenger in that car, someone else's car. And when they stopped it for a traffic stop, they found a gun that was under his seat. I don't look under the passenger seat of my friends' cars when I get into them. Maybe I should. Maybe he should have. But they didn't find any palm prints or fingerprints or DNA of Richard Williams on that gun. It was just under his seat. So these guns that they're linking to Richard Williams are based on proximity to the guns. And we know these things were passed around because there's multiple DNA on all these things. And the young man, Larry North, who got up here and tried to testify, first of all, the only person that says that Richard Williams even left in a BMW with Brandon Perry and with Mr. Bassett at that 9 o'clock hour was Larry North, who sat up here in the sunglasses, and he hated my guts. That was pretty clear. He's the only person who says, I think that those 4 individuals got into that car around 9 o'clock and they left. Watch the video, the one that's at 9:07 at Green Hills, and you see them get in the car. You see 6 guys come out. I think it's 6, I think it's 6 actually that come out. It looks like 2 of them get into that BMW. And the other 4 get into that gold car that's sitting next to it. It looks like 2 people get into that BMW. So if Larry North is telling you that Richard Williams got into that car at 9:07, he's lying. Or he didn't see it, or he's making it up. Because it looks like only 2 people got it. You can judge for yourself. Watch the video. What happened after 9 o'clock, between 9 o'clock and after 10 o'clock, when that shooting in Lonsdale? We don't know where anybody was during that period of time. That's an hour. It doesn't take an hour to drive to Lonsdale. Were they dropping people off? Were they picking people up? We just don't know. Who was in that car? We don't know. But we do know that no one says Richard Williams was, except for Larry North, who clearly was mistaken about him leaving at 9 o'clock. It's only 2 people get in that car. So how is he taught, Larry North, we watched evidence about another incident where they're saying where Larry North got shot, and that is in Townview Towers. And that's where you see the bullets there at the top of the staircase. There are casings, and there's a good picture of this, casings at the top of a staircase, and you can see Larry North's clothing or whatever's left over from where he was lying after he got shot. This is his brother, right? These are families. They've known each other forever. And he wants you to believe, after he sat up here and said, I didn't see who shot me. Remember that? I didn't see who shot me. He was 10 feet away from him. If that was him standing there shooting, whoever was shooting 10 feet away, 15 feet away, you can judge the distance from the picture. And he wants you to believe he didn't see who shot him. And it must have been him because he was texting that day. Or at least we think that was him texting. Nobody actually linked to the phone to Richard Williams or anything like that. There's just nothing other than Larry North saying, yeah, I think that was Richard Williams texting me that day. I didn't see who shot me. What does that have to do with Lonsdale? How does that prove that Richard Williams was in Lonsdale? It doesn't. And they didn't offer any proof of that. The chase, the car chase, that's a day. It's a totally different day. And you heard they weren't looking for Richard Williams, they were looking for Kipling Colbert. Richard was driving. You saw he started to pull over. I don't know what was said in that car, but he looked like he was pulling over before they took off. Then they bailed and ran. Dumb decision, obviously. And I'm not saying that he didn't make stupid decisions. I'm not saying that he didn't hang out with the wrong people, but I am saying that the state didn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Richard Williams was anywhere near Lonsdale on December 17, 2015. That's it. You heard the officer interviewed Mr. Williams because Mr. Williams came in there voluntarily and spoke with him. Told him he wasn't there. That's all we have. So the state wants you to link him to that scene with that chart. It's a really pretty chart. And what that chart shows is what guns were at that scene. And then they want you to take the leap that because we found these guns in certain areas where we think Richard Williams had been, or under a seat of a car that's not his, which, by the way, Larry North sat up here and said he didn't ever have a gun. And we just saw a text from Kipling Colbert to Larry North saying, I'm coming to get that heat, right? The man who said he didn't have a gun must have had a gun, right? At least one gun. Or what is somebody coming to pick up from him? The guns. Who owns these guns? I didn't hear any evidence about these being stolen guns. There's serial numbers clearly in the pictures. You can look at the guns. They're not scraped off serial numbers. Who owns these guns? Who registered these handguns? Are they registered? I don't know. We just don't know. We don't know anything about the car where they found one of the guns. We don't know if they're registered. We don't know who owns them. We don't know who handled them. We know that Richard Williams' DNA is not on there, or at least they can't say that it is. And we know that he's excluded from almost everything else they tested. So don't get lost in all of these scenes. And don't get lost in all the confusion of all these things that happened and all this extraneous evidence that they're putting in, trying to make Richard Williams look like a bad guy and connect him to these guns. Because they just don't. It's proximity to this gun, and that's it. And that's the only thing that links him to it all seen in Lonsdale. And those are the crimes that you are here to determine guilt or innocence on. Just that. You're not here to decide who shot Brandon Perry's mom. You're not here to decide who was present or who shot Brandon Perry. We didn't hear any of that anyway. You're here to decide who shot Zaevion Dobson. This is a horrible tragedy. And for justice to work, you got to get it right. And this isn't an emotional exercise. This is an intellectual exercise. This is where I asked you to separate out Richard Williams. This is where I asked you to separate out these different individuals and to look at the evidence that's presented and apply it to them. I can't speak for the other defendants. I represent Richard Williams. And there's absolutely nothing in the state's case that ties him to that scene. There's absolutely nothing in this case, state's case, that tells you that Richard Williams ever touched a gun that day, had anything to do with the gun that day, was ever in Lonsdale. And if they can't prove that he was there or that he shot a gun, then you cannot find him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of anything to do with the shooting in Lonsdale. And when you go back and you deliberate, I'm going to ask you to look through all the evidence and see if I'm wrong. Because I'm not wrong. There's no evidence against Richard Williams with regards to this shooting. And you have to find him not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Mr. Chairman, would you like to make a closing argument?
I'm good, Your Honor. Thank you.
Whatever you prefer.
For 12 days before Christmas, y'all sat here patiently and I appreciate it. You've listened to lawyers, you've listened to experts, you've listened to lay witnesses. And we've all spoke to you. And as my father used to say, I hear what you're saying. It used to be an acknowledgement that I don't necessarily agree with you, but I hear what you're saying. And we've got all these puzzle pieces up here. I have everybody's name on this puzzle that relates to what actually happened in Lonsdale, because that's the crime that's being prosecuted, not all of this other collateral incident. But what's important is that you know the whole story. Kind of like what I told you at the very beginning with regards to if someone doesn't tell you the whole story, they only tell you part of the story, you've got a problem with credibility. And I tie in the holidays because, ladies and gentlemen, if ifs and buts, if the prosecution had proved but for astute lawyer, any one of the three of us had pointed out, I could look at the burden of proof and find somebody guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. I ask every single one of you relative to what your values were and how strong you felt, and could you hold on to those values in the light of what I told you was going to be pressure. And guys, there's pressure here. And the responsibility when you use the term credibility starts at the beginning of the trial when you give an opening statement. It continues throughout when you put witnesses on the stand and you say, lady or gentleman, tell this jury what you know. And the one thing that you have when you were born as a little bitty baby is credibility. And you continue to build that credibility by being honest. And when I say ifs and buts, that means you can't will someone. You can't will it to be true. You can't wish it to be true, despite what you may think. So, when we talk about the practice of law, our law in the United States is derived, albeit roughly, from English law. And we have barristers and we have solicitors in a court of law in England. Y'all wonder where I'm going with all of this. This guy's just out here in left field. He's telling us stuff about jolly old England. Well, the barristers are the folks, men and women, that appear in the high courts in England. And just like in the United States in the early days of our judicial system, a gentleman who would have the privilege of speaking to a jury, like you folks, would be robed, and we would wear a wig. It was a white powdered wig. And that white powdered wig coined a phrase because they were primarily made of wool. Don't pull the wool over someone's eyes. You can look it up. That's where that phrase comes. And so when you start a case, you have to maintain your credibility all the way through. Okay? I'm not being a smart aleck lawyer when I point out shortcomings in the case of the state. We talked about a dachshund dog. And they roll over and they show you their belly. I'm not a dachshund. But I have a responsibility to one man over there, Christopher Bassett. And I take that responsibility to my heart. I care about Mr. Bassett. Do I recognize that a tragedy and a horrific loss of life occurred? Yes. There were 2 lives lost. Young people are dying every day. But you cannot allow your emotion to cloud your rational thought with credibility. So, excuse me. When you look at the roadmap that we give you, you got presented an opening statement. You know what was absent from that? Just said 40 cal. Wonder why? Wonder why? Didn't say Glock. And then, you know, I've got it over here, the Fort Promise call. Wonder why? Wonder why that representatives of the state of Tennessee didn't tell you about it. What about the statement back in opening statement that they went over there and they hooded up and everybody got ready to go? But even the clip that they play in the beginning during opening statement said what? That they were in hoodies. That in fact a number of young people, remember I asked these officers, did you see the hoodies? And you know, we kind of got a chuckle in response. Yeah, what did that indicate? That it was cold. Okay, I get it. I asked for that. When the state serves me softballs, if you don't think I'm going to swing the bat, guys, y'all are sadly mistaken. It's kind of like Gallagher with the watermelon. Okay? Those things matter. When you culturally stereotype because hoodies don't matter, you are doing that for one purpose. You are doing that to pull the wool over the proposed recipient's eyes. Now, what about this? Not saying anything disparaging. Sweatshirts don't have anything to do with it. Who else had a sweatshirt on? The victim. He had a sweatshirt on. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. Just the way it works. How come we didn't hear anything about Alicia Harris, Jasmine Mason, Andrew Cornelius, or Paul Cornelius in the state's opening statement? Because they don't want to tell you those things. Because they're going to do the whole created, what? Game thing. Okay? So we mislead and we start with gang affiliation when they know what? That their expert, Tom Walker, says they're not gang members. Not gang members. We're just going to adopt this. We're going to show you videos. We're going to scare you. And we're not going to tell you about the Fort Promise incident. We're going to act as if it didn't happen. We're not going to tell you about Jasmine Mason, Brandon Perry's girlfriend, Andrew Cornelius being her baby daddy, Paul Cornelius being involved, and a call of a shooting out there in Western Heights. But now, all of a sudden, we get to hear all of the reports relative to the Western Heights. So credibility, why is it important? Because if you compromise your credibility, your responsibility, then you don't have anything left. It's not win at all costs. It is tell folks the truth. Tell them the truth, the whole unadulterated, ugly truth, and let the chips fall where they may. Now, 911 CAD reports. Again, I'm serious. You know, high over the plate, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe that's happening. You know what? Staples really do matter. I'm sorry. That's a softball. That is a mistake that the state did not have to make. That wasn't in their opening statement, was it? Now, is Mike Mays a nice guy? He's a nice guy. I don't know why the 911 guy chose to, I don't know, I hate to use the term lie, but you heard it. You heard me ask, when is the last time you had any contact with the Attorney General's office about this case in any way, shape, manner, form, text, email, calls, discussions? Been almost a year ago. And then Lo and behold, I got a call the night before. You know what? Those little bitty staples, y'all have all been in an office sometime, or you've all reached and grabbed something. Those little bitty staples, they left a mark. We look at crime scene integrity. We get somebody looking up you, telling you that despite the fact there's a general order and a standard operating procedure, that, you know what, they really don't matter anymore. And you know what, I manufactured one. I manufactured one. The largest homicide, or certainly one of the most publicly recognized homicide in the city of Knoxville's history. I don't know when the last time that a sitting president of the United States has mentioned a tragic event and mentioned Knoxville, Tennessee, and we don't have a crime law.
Outside the record.
Wait. The jury will disregard the previous statement of defense counsel.
It's chaotic. It's out of control. What about those hoodies? Let's talk a little bit more about crime scene. Okay? What about it? Remember, again, it's a softball. I've reviewed these videos, and John Stevens, we get a video, and they can't explain it. Never explain. We've got the sudden appearance, the hoodie theory, dropped a couple of hoodies in there. Crime scene integrity. If you don't maintain a crime scene, you got a situation. Now, all the 238 Dallas Street officers show people with hoodies on. Remember, we have all this discussion about when they arrive? That makes a difference. Now, take Bethany fine, okay? Here we go. Softball number 3. All right, you ready for this one? We've got Brandon Perry's clothes showing you soaked in blood. They pulled the gray thermal out. They marched it all up and down here. They pulled the red shoes out. They marched it all up and down here. And can you believe it? General Fitzgerald says, Tech Fine, just pull out the shirt and the hoodie, the coat. What do I have to pull out? I have to pull out the deceased shoes. And then there we go, right back to crime scene integrity on the manufactured crime scene log. Who's not on it? Evidently that old school method, that method that Investigator Leffler applied or had somebody apply the first time when we wrote all the names down, it evidently works better on its face what we saw occur in the created time scene. Now, here we go again. We want to steer you and we want to talk about nefarious switching the cars. Remember that's discussed like an opening statement? Brandon Perry's been driving that BMW all night. I don't know how long he was driving it, but I know that he drove it up to Dallas Street. I know he drove it away. And everybody's in their same clothes. Nobody's gearing up. Larry North. The gift sunglasses. I so wanted to say something smart aleck about that, and I restrained myself because that's not professional. Gift sunglasses. He talks about clearly the music group. He denies gang membership. And you know what? No GSR. No GSR. We're going to talk about GSR just a little bit later. But no GSR. I mean, they've got an absolute, what I would consider to be a responsibility. Crime scene integrity, maintaining things, and they don't do it. Now, listen relative to what Larry North says. Schilling, along with Tiasia, along with Richard Williams, who on one of the officers' videos says, I was asleep in the crib. That's the 9mm. That's the 9mm shell. And the state ignores that because it don't fit their model. It don't fit. I'm going to ram that piece in there whether or not it fits or not, and I'm going to scare these good people. Now, what about that black BMW? We hear about this BMW leaving Lonsdale. But then we hear Latasha Colbert, who says, you know what, no, that was a friend, and Zach went out there. And then we talk to Zach, and he tells us that, no, that's a lady, and told her to get out of there because there had been a shooting. Now, police lineups, negative, 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 negative. Everybody there says we can't identify anyone. So what is the absence of evidence? Well, number one, it's the absent. Number two, it is a public, basically, acknowledgement that we did what we could do. That works well until we have all those problems with crime scene integrity and those other issues. Now, remember I had all those discussions about nuts and crazy relative to Jasmine Mason? And you know, I got another softball. I got a softball that I couldn't believe came across the plate during close. So I get to look at what they do, just like they get to look at what I do. Did you notice the chronology of what the general was showing you with regards to statements of Mr. Bassett? Boom, 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 boom. They're not in order. He's picking and he's choosing. You don't get to do that. When you stow stuff out of chronology and out of order, you lose your credibility. It's clearly about a girl. Investigator Leffler thinks it's about a girl. They had this discussion about a girl. He cuts that little section off in his close. Doesn't want to talk about the whole girl. There's no thought of gangs at the scene. I will submit to you, I asked Investigator Leffler, I went over it, you saw the video. Nobody says anything about gangs except one question asked, and it is said negatively. Okay? Say Patrick, the audience kid culprit from a video. Who else was in that video? I hope I never have to see that video again. It's not my kind of music. Those screenshots, you know what? They are what they are, but who else is in those screenshots? Christopher Bassett. You have any idea of Christopher Bassett? Nope. No photo lineup IDs, no ID of Bassett in the video. Andrew Markham, January 17, 2016. Why is that black line important? What is the number one alibi? You heard from Officer Vanessa Mays. If you're in the jailhouse, you don't have anything to do with January 17th, 2016. Told you about Zaevion Dobson as far as being a juvenile in the car. And of course, again, you know, I'm being facetious because nobody wants to be in jail, but if you're in jail, you realize that exculpates you. You're done. That line from here on, my man's gone. My man's out of the equation. Did you hear anybody talk to you about my client's cell phone? You heard it on the video. My battery, my battery, my battery. I mean, that video left more questions than answers. You also don't hear anything about my client being involved in anything in Western Heights, do you? So you got a finite window in which my client is even remotely mentioned. That's all you got. Now, Officer Brian Mason, he gets the call from the stand. General called me. The office called me. That's the OMG call, okay? Monday, after my voir dire, what was he about? He was about the first section. Now, no revolver casings, not one of those casings because it came out of a revolver. Credibility matters. When you serve up softballs, don't expect me to swing the bat and strike it. Tom Walker. Christopher Jerome Bassett, not a gang member. He talked about the long history of service he had at the Knoxville Police Department. Fine man. Does what he does. He said he was excited about coming over to the Sheriff's Department because when he came over to the Sheriff's Department, he would have the ability to harvest information, gang graffiti, calls, signs, everything out of the jail. Are monitored at the jail, emails monitored, you're controlled, regular monitored. I asked him about video surveillance cameras, hundreds of cameras. Nothing indicating Bassett's in a gang. He's been there 2 years. 3 days short. We ain't got nothing. Hat has his name on the back and is a Boston Red Sox hat. That doesn't do it. No gang tattoos. I asked him about John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall have everlasting life. Look it up if you think I'm I probably butchered it a little bit, but that's the general premise with regards to it. Now, he testified gangs no longer defined by geography. We've heard from these young people, where you live does not make you a gang member. And then, this is the man that is the gang expert. They tendered him, not me. They tendered him, and he provides type lyrics that certainly you got to look at and then got taken up. And then I point out that the letter C is replete throughout those lyrics. And then we want to scroll that a secretary in somebody's office typed it up and that, well, he didn't do it. You know what? If I'm the expert and I'm going to attest and I'm going to submit something for a jury to see and look at, I'll make sure it's right. Or if I don't, I'm going to own it. Now, says what you banging means what gang you in, and yet Devontae talks about that being what gun you have. Now, testified 28 previous. Here we go right back to this pressure thing. Pressure, 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 pressure. This is the first time he's been used in a case without gang members. The first time. First time. I believe the TDI agent said that was his first time. Remember the GSR fellow that had retired? His first time too. And he admits, remember we listened to the end of the video, what are they selling? Videos, music. He's not even brought in until 1 month because basically the state knows they're in trouble. They've got to get that brush out and it don't matter. We're going to paint it. We're going to do what we need. And you know what? That's probably the greatest example of the state's willingness to label somebody without evidence. No gang enhancement? Why? Because they can't get their gang expert to follow the malarkey. You know, one of the things that I thought about, and I talked about it in Board I, I talked about basically the United States Constitution. Ready for the hokey? It's not hokey. Men and women died and spilled their blood so that we have this Bill of Rights. And you know what's contained in that Bill of Rights? The very First Amendment. I don't know if the order that our forefathers created amendments indicated their importance, but it said Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. That's not a bill of suggestions, ladies and gentlemen. That is truly, I've lost my control. Sorry, I get fired up. That's a Bill of Rights. And you know, we're going to label people gang members. We're going to sit there and we're going to talk about their expression, their music. It's not my cup of tea. Some people like Pepsi, some people like Coke. My daddy used to say that's why they make Fords and Chevrolets, because you got a choice in this country. Best alibi ever. No doubt about it. We're in the jailhouse. The prosecution is nervous, and I mean nervous. OMG, nervous, capital N, nervous. Why? Because they've got 12 folks in a box, and they realize that if they step up to the bat and Matty Casey strikes out, they got a problem. They have got a deceased young man that by all accounts is a hero. Don't take anything away from him. I don't disparage him, and I've not disparaged him in this trial, nor will I. But you know what they got? They got squat. They got a GSR expert that we transported. You know, the general sort of asked my client, the state of Tennessee's paying my expert. Educated in Sheffield, England. Eminently qualified, but the state of Tennessee's paying him. You think that fella just come over from Nashville on his own accord? Just because, you know, he wanted Nashville? We got a GSR expert, and you know what he tells us? Y'all heard that, right? The antiquated, in that they were still using antiquated kits, and there was a memorandum that went out to all major law enforcement agencies June of 2015 that said to use the metal disc kit, that was the accepted standard. And what's KPD do? Multiple shooting scenes. A, they don't take any GSR despite the fact that they corral a bunch of folks up. And, you know, to Investigator Leffler's credit, when he's pinned down and he's asked, you know what, you can't test what you didn't collect. You can't. They fumbled, not me. You give me the ball and I'm going to strike it. That's my responsibility. 300 times and has never seen anything like this. Not once. So why is the state calling? Public pressure. Want to make everybody feel good about this, that we've done everything we can. You know what? I'll be honest. I actually thought long and hard about not hiding that football. All right, now we got crime blogs that are just an absolute mess, and then we continue to persist, in this case, presenting evidence that we don't have anything. We don't have DNA. We swabbed, we did all of our good stuff, and we come up with goose egg. Nada. No lineup IDs. You know what Investigator Loeffler talked about? He's the main guy. He's got the big notebook. Remember, it was sitting up there on his desk? He's got this monster notebook of information. It contains everything. It's called the murder book. Okay? And the crime scene's 100 yards or more. That's a football field. Whether or not it's good, bad, or ugly, what'd he do? He lied to Chris Bassett. He cajoled Chris Bassett. He stressed Chris Bassett. It's called stressing someone. You know what? He didn't make it. I don't think he's going to make it. You increase the stressors on a human being, and look at the time. It's like 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, and then things happen. He answers to Chris Bassett, and after all of that, ... Actually learned that from one of my law partners. That's like the ellipses. I didn't know. I used to call it ... My ignorance, I'm sorry. Okay? You get that? I only got a statement that Bassett, a reluctant cousin, honest to God, he's crying, he comes off pitiful, that he didn't want to be a bitch, and he shot up in the air. He shot up in the air. And then you look at all this evidence. You look at it. You remember what I did? I went over everything with Patty Ressick, and I went into all of that. And you know what? Don't you look at the questions asked? You got to see the whole video. Investigator Loeffler, his questions leave more questions unanswered than answered, except for, fist bump here, most prophetic words, just because he does something doesn't make you guilty of this. Just because Brandon does something doesn't make you guilty of this. Most disappointing and desperate move, Investigator Loeffler. He admits, being pinned into it, that basically the Knox County Attorney General's office conjured up this whole rap video gang idea. You know why? Because we want to scare you. Did y'all see that 600 video? You know what? Everybody's running around, they got guns, they're doing this stuff, and they're doing their music. One man's treasure is another man's garbage. It don't matter whether or not you like it. It matters whether or not you, as a free citizen in the United States of America, have the wherewithal and the gumption to stand up for your rights, my rights, their rights, everybody's rights in this country and say, you know what? That's free expression. May not like it, may not be my, but that's free expression. Desperation breeds mistakes. This case is full of them. Excuse me. Sorry, I got to get a drink. Pressure. You got the police chief addressing things. You got a hero.
Outside the record yet again.
Sustain the objection, disregard the previous.
Would ask that that be taken down.
Yeah.
I mean, I probably would too. I'm not.
Stop. Ladies and gentlemen, leave no bush and chairs, do not assess this case among yourselves. Go back with the officers, please. All right, folks, now see. Mr. Jones, you have to stop making personal attacks on the integrity of these prosecutors. You are talking more about yourself than you are your client. You need to focus on the facts of this case and not doing fist bumps in the air with Investigator Leffler and talking about that these folks are...
I appreciate and respect that. I'm trying to first-degree murders case, and I have the responsibility of that young man.
Let me talk. I'll give you an opportunity.
I'd like to address it on the record.
I will give you an opportunity.
Thank you.
But a large portion of your argument has been improper. You need to focus on the facts of this case instead of attacking the integrity of the prosecutors and saying that they are doing something deceitful. Now, you can attack the facts and say that you shouldn't believe them or that they're wrong, but you're attacking them personally. Now, what do you want to say?
I don't think I'm attacking them personally. I take exception to that. I take exception to the situation where the prosecutor doesn't like it when I point out that there are other pressures at play. I think I have a right to do that. This is closing argument, and argument by its very definition is exactly that. It is argument. I will certainly respect. I took the slide down, whatever the court says, and I will follow your direction. But when I point out the shortcomings of the prosecution, the Knoxville Police Department, and the way this investigation was handled, that is not improper. That is my job, Your Honor.
And I agree with that. The problem is you're talking about yourself so much that if you don't throw a softball up there and I'm not going to take a swing at it, you're going to do, talk about what the facts point out. Now, and listen, there has been no evidence presented regarding pressure on the stay. And so when you're arguing, and that's what Mr. Morton objected to, you're arguing facts outside of the evidence in this case. So you cannot argue that there's any pressure other than the fact that it is a high-profile case, which you've allowed to bring in. All right, let's bring the jury back in.
Patricia Bassett, I give credit where credit's due. Far and away, the most straight shooting witness we heard from. Not just because she does ballistics and she investigates matters involving guns, slugs, and casings, but she talked about polygonal rifling, going back to the whole Glock thing. Remember, that's left out of opening statement. So, when we talk about polygonal rifling, we know that polygonal rifling is something that is peculiar to a Glock. And where is the only polygonal rifled slug? In the side of a van recovered several days later that was on the scene, and that when you actually look in the scene photograph is back toward the back of the area. Whoops. I'll try this one. See it? Not my exhibit. There's the van. Okay? Look where the van, look where the arrow goes. Look where the convergence. Again, it's not recovered on the night. Now, the fatal shot, the QZD, which we know means question, and then the ZD stands for Zaevion Dobson. Of course, the QV, she pointed out, I thought it was vehicle, she said van. Okay? That's the .40 caliber Smith & Wesson. When you leave off the manufacturer, it makes a difference. It makes a big difference. And, you know, relative to her testimony, they can't put a Glock slug anywhere near 2704 Badgett. They can't put anything near 2704 Badgett relative to the Glock other than these shell casings. Remember, we had the dialogue in the interchange with Ms. Resick relative to shooting up in the air. Bam, 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 bam. I shoot up in the air and the shell casings eject. That does not in any way, shape, manner, or form indicate the direction that the rounds went. And then, of course, she answered, which is fine, relative to what comes up. You know, does gravity work in her world? Yes, it works in her world. There are a variety of factors. There's no slugs. You don't have anything to controvert what Mr. Bassett said with regards to it. Medical examiner, don't take a lot of exception with anything. Short survival, wrinkle under the shirt indicates right hand was up. Shot was from victim's right to left. Shot was from victim's right to left. I'm on the porch. Right to left. You saw the photographs of where he ended up laying down. Right to left. Go look at where the porch is. Right to left. That's not outgoings, I would submit. That's for you to decide. Shot came from higher and went lower. What do we know? We know that Zaevion Dobson was on a porch. Right? Higher to lower. He's 5'10", and we know where he ended up. That's what we know. That's what we take to that. Now, the elements of first-degree murder. Why are these elements important? Because the state's got to prove every single one of these to get you up to guilty, to climb that peak. Every single element beyond a reasonable doubt. Not just part of it. They've got to prove the intentionally refers to a person who acts intentionally with respect to the nature of the conduct or to a result of the conduct when it is conscious, objective, or desire to engage in the conduct. They've got to prove premeditation. They've got to prove a demise, and obviously the victim in this case is Zaevion Dobson. They've got to prove all of those factors by a reasonable doubt. I admit to you that with regards to Chris Bassett, they don't get there. If there were a charge of criminal stupidity or a charge or someone reaching out to you as your cousin, but the prophetic words of A.J. Leffler will ring true. Just because Brandon did something doesn't mean you're guilty. Can't prove he did anything but shoot up in the air. And it better. Now, criminal responsibility. Got to prove all those elements that were listed on that previous slide with regards to the first degree murder of Zaevion Dobson. That Mr. Bassett had the intent. That Mr. Bassett intended to solicit direct aid or attempt to aid in the commission of the first degree murder, and that he took some action. You've got to prove that he went out there with that intent. A reluctant person out there, that he went out there with that intent, and if you can't do that, then that's why you have a large jury instruction that has a litany of lesser included offenses that give you definitions that tell you what responsibility you have as jurors when you are evaluating all of the evidence. Again, right back to as far as guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And once again, when we deal with things of this nature, with integrity. We deal with case-consistent integrity. And you know, we get to argue about what parlance is. Of course, I had the statement typed up. You got to see the audio and video of the statement with the state's version relative to what Mr. Bassett said. And I will submit to you that, ladies, punctuation matters. It matters immensely. When you look at that video, you look at Investigator Left's reaction. He does not have a gotcha moment because the general wanted to show this to you again, and Mr. Bassett's statement was, I can't, I ain't seen nobody get shot, period. I ain't never shot nobody, period. I just seen that my cousin got shot in the neck. You leave out periods, and what does that do? What does that do? That perverts a sentence. And they don't get to do that for their own attempt to get to beyond a reasonable doubt. And if any of it causes you the slight bit of discomfort, if it causes you trepidation, then the state has got a problem. And the state's problem is that they have the burden of proof. We have no burden of proof. I told you at the beginning that we start out in front, that it is our race. We have to participate. We're invited by the state, but we're in the lead. And until such time as they carry this burden beyond a reasonable doubt, you know, look at all these. Proven not guilty, highly unlikely, less than likely, probably not, unlikely, possibly not, may not be, perhaps, suspected, possibly guilty, probably guilty, guilt likely, guilt highly likely. They got to get all the way up there. It's kind of like the red line on the automobile, the tachometer of justice. You got to blow that motor. You don't get to go part way. You know, I talked to you a little bit about gilding the lily. I talked to you all about that in opening statement. Shakespeare. To gild refined gold, to paint the lily, to throw a perfume on the violet, to smooth the ice, or add another hue unto the rainbow, or with taper light to seek the beauteous eye of heaven to garnish, is wasteful and ridiculous excess. Ladies and gentlemen, why does the state concentrate so much on gilding the lily? Because they want to pull the proverbial wool over your eyes. They can't meet their burden, ladies and gentlemen, and based upon that, you've got a gilded lily, and a gilded lily simply cannot stand. And it is without a doubt that based upon that, you've got to have maintained case, consistent credibility from start to finish. It is not my case to maintain credibility on. It is to maintain credibility on. And for those reasons, ladies and gentlemen, I would ask that you go back and in your considered, contemplated, and long-spent analysis and judgment, employing what the judge will tell you that you are allowed to use, your life experiences, your knowledge, and return a verdict of not guilty with regards to Mr. Bassett and these allegations contained herein, including but not limited to first-degree murder. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. All right, folks, we're going to take a 10-minute recess and allow the state to have their rebuttal.